Rather recording. All right. So we're talking about how do we annotate academic literature, and one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that academic literature can be a pathway for you to engage with different audiences. And annotating academic literature can be a pathway for engaging a body of literature. And it can contribute to situating your own writing in a way that fills an existing gap in the research on a particular topic. It can allow you to articulate what is it about your writing that is advancing what we already know about a particular topic. That's the importance of reading what is out there, is to be able to situate yourself in relation to the existing conversations that folks are having. And I want to also clarify that some of those conversations are happening in academic articles, in peer-reviewed journals, or in academic books. But I want to encourage you to think about conversations that have societal relevance well beyond those traditional outlets. Because if we adopt a decolonial approach to knowledge, we acknowledge that there is knowledge well beyond the boundaries of academic literature and outlets. So sometimes it may make sense for you to read documents that are not necessarily found in the type of databases that store academic literature that we'll talk about today. So I want you to really embrace a very open approach to identifying knowledge out there and really important contributions to literature. To give you an example, sometimes I listen to what activists are debating and I write about the existing debates. I would have never found that in an academic journal. Instead, I found that in maybe a blog post, or maybe I saw a live stream from some type of social media outlet, and I listened to what they had to say. I wrote it down. Then I did my best to represent what they were trying to say in that debate. And it's really interesting to listen to and to read about the types of debates that activists are having on the ground, right? They're literally discussing what is to be done about a particular problem. And sometimes academic literature can be out of touch with that. So this is why we want to have really a wide net in terms of the literature that we examine. And I want to share with you a number of strategies that you can use to conduct effective literature reviews. And of course, we're drawing from the Jeffrey Knopf reading and the Yvette Alex Assensaw reading, which I think are absolutely crucial for really getting a good sense of what the purpose of this type of work is, and also what kind of questions do we ask about an article while we're reading it. So you go into an article already with a strategy in mind, because you already know this is what I want to get out of this article. So what is the importance of a literature review? Well, it helps us understand what we know, but also, as importantly, what we don't know. You might think that throughout the history of mankind, that all people have now investigated everything that is to be investigated. Well, let me tell you right now that there is still a lot to be learned, and that there are a lot of opportunities for all of you to identify gaps in existing debates and existing literature where you can actually make a contribution and help to address that gap. Having a good sense of what's been written about something will allow you to say that there is a gap. But it's hard to say that there's a gap if you haven't been able to read that work. By virtue of identifying existing gaps and having critical appreciation of what has already been written, you can also position yourself to advance existing knowledge on a particular topic and deepen our understanding of social problems and potential solutions. Also, something that often happens when you're starting to do research is that you ask really, really broad questions. Some people think that's a huge problem. I want to tell you that that is not a huge problem. Asking big questions is important. And you should always keep in mind those big questions that you have when you start doing research. Why? Because those are the questions that ground your interest in a particular topic. And even if you start narrowing down until you get to an actual feasible research project, you never want to forget the questions that motivated you to do that work. Because you always want to be able to say, this specific research question that I ended up with, this very narrow research question that is actually feasible, that I might finish working on within 6 months, 3 months, 2 months, is important to study because it speaks to this broader, bigger research question. So never forget that big research question that you first had when you went into the literature. But again, we won't be able to study a really big research question and do it justice in a small period of time. So what do? We refine our research question. We ask smaller questions that still are really important to answer and to examine. And literature allows you to refine that question. You know, hey, there's this whole debate, but we don't know about this particular thing, so I'm going to focus on that particular thing. Refining is important for the feasibility of a study, of a paper. Also, if there's something really similar to what you're trying to do and it's already been done, then maybe you situate your own research in a way that advances that or challenges that, as opposed to just doing what's already been done. It really can be very defeating to go through an entire research project, spend all your time, and sometimes it requires money, to then realize, someone had already done everything that we're doing. You would have saved yourself that effort, and you'd have done something differently had you had a good idea of what the literature was out there. So you prevent duplication. And this next point is super important to me. I went to an institution for undergrad where we didn't have access to the types of databases that I'm going to share with you here. Which meant that the way I was trained to think was through theory. Because you remember the Edwidge Dandicat and Haiti, they read the Greeks. Greeks are accessible. A lot of people can get a hand on a traditional, a classical political theory text. It's harder to read the 2023 articles that are coming out, right? We've talked about this. If you don't have an affiliation to a well-researched institution, you find yourself behind a paywall, and you won't get access to that. Thankfully, that's not our problem. But the good thing about thinking theoretically is that when we're trying to answer a research question, we want to be able to entertain at least 3 different potential explanations for the outcome that you're interested in. And that is what a theoretical framework is. A theoretical framework is a series of potential explanations for an outcome of interest. Building a really good theoretical framework can make or break a study. This is an opportunity that you can have based on your reading of the literature to say, existing literature has had at least 2 or 3 explanations for this outcome of interest. Instead, I propose that what's happening here is this explanation. This is where you can innovate, where you can come up with your own potential explanation for an outcome of interest. And that's fun. The ability to you actually theorize, to come up with a potential explanation for a phenomenon. But you need to be able to read to know what's new. What kind of potential explanation have we not explored? And maybe from reading the literature, you're like, there's this stuff that I read that hasn't been approached when it comes to this research question, but I could draw from that literature and those ideas and come up with an explanation that hasn't been considered for this outcome. So literature reviews allow you to build good theoretical frameworks. They also allow you to have a theory, and theories are made of concepts. Okay, you have a conceptual definition of something, and then you can develop a measure of that concept. So you need to be able to, if you're doing empirical work of the positivist kind, which is the type of research that believes that we can have causal explanations, then you need to be able to define concepts and then measure these concepts, right? So let's say that the outcome of interest here in our classroom is solidarity. And we define that outcome of interest as ties between people. And we measure those ties as whether people are sharing information or resources. The literature allows you to think about the potential outcome, the theories that might drive that solidarity. What are good ways of defining that concept of solidarity? And what are good ways of measuring that concept? Another reason why literature reviews are important is because they help us with a really crucial aspect of research that folks often forget, which is thinking through the practical applications of our research. And that requires reading as well, right? Because we have to understand maybe the research that we're doing has policy implications, but we need to read the literature on the policy so we have an understanding of the policy, the potential problems with that policy, and how our research can help us inform solutions to that particular policy problem. All of these are reasons why we should be engaging in literature reviews and annotating literature. Any questions so far? Again, literature reviews can help you frame research within existing knowledge. You can highlight existing gaps in the literature, things that folks haven't dealt with before. They can help you shape your research question and narrow it down. Also, when you have a good sense of what's written out there, you might find that there's actually really good data about a particular topic. Like the other day, by virtue of reading, I found out that there's a centralized database of all power outages in the United States at the county level. And I was really excited because now I can look at the extent to which there are inequalities in outages and whether those inequalities are associated with mortalities and other health outcomes, which is a question I'm really interested in, energy inequality and its health outcomes. I wouldn't have known that there was that big database had I not been engaged in reading. And reading, it's not the type of thing that you need to wait and tell yourself, today I'm going to read. I always tell folks, sometimes reading and writing happens when you least expect it. You know, you come across things. I think I was reading an article, a news article, and it linked the study. And I clicked on the link and boom, I read the study and then I went down and it said data availability. And then I clicked on the link and whoa, this whole database is right here. I felt like I hit jackpot. Again, another benefit of engaging in reading the literature and seeing what's out there. You might find data. Like, Olivia, right? How long did you spend collecting your data?
A long time before I found the database.
There you go. You would have saved how many hours? Good chunk of hours. You probably have a lot of ideas of things you've got to do with that time. Yes, me too. So maybe reading can actually help you and cut the amount of time that you spend on a particular project. By the way, librarians, we don't think about them enough, but librarians know research topics and they also know where there might be good databases. We have wonderful librarians. Use them. Contact them. Connect with them. Tell them, am I doing the right thing here in terms of how I'm finding the relevant literature? And we'll talk more about when they can intervene in really positive ways. Also, for some of you, you've never published a peer-reviewed article, and a review article can be a really good way to get your first publication. I've done that. Review articles are also high-impact publications because a lot of people read them and cite them. Why? Because there's a great summary of everything that's been written about that topic. So some of you may want to get some publications out there, and a really good literature review essay might be your first good publication. It might be your first publication, right? So we are often encouraged to cast wide nets when it comes to identifying literature on a particular topic. And that's why I've mentioned that sometimes there might be a database that everybody in your field goes to identify literature on a particular topic. Maybe you're used to using Google Scholar, right? It's a good tool, I use it. But it's not the only one, and casting a wider net can be very, very helpful in terms of identifying things that these databases might be missing. Also, it allows us to engage across disciplines. You know, when you think about social problems don't care about your major. Right? When we try to address social problems, we need to really adopt holistic understandings of the problems. And it may be that if we only use the theories that our field has generated to try to understand that problem, we won't do a very good job of addressing that problem. And that often, by virtue of engaging in a broader array of theories from different fields, we have better potential understandings and explanations for a particular problem and the potential solutions to it. So diversifying your sources is key to be able to doing that, to engage in cross-disciplinary inquiry. And again, this is where you could be really innovative. Let me, for instance, give you the example of folks who have been applying theories of racial capitalism to understand environmental justice problems. We saw that with Laura Pulido's work on Flint. You'll see my cross-disciplinary engagement when you read my study on energy restoration after Hurricane Maria. We accounted for potential explanations for power restoration through deployment delays that came from a bunch of fields, including engineering. Like, for instance, there were some folks that argued that power restoration timing depends on the level of devastation that a hurricane leaves behind. Okay, makes sense, boom. We got a measure of wind speeds and the extent to which there were floods in that particular region for the entire area that we're focusing on. We also had theories from political science. There were some that were saying, well, if you're part of the ruling party, and that neighborhood is associated with the ruling party, then the party in power is going to say, let's take care of our own, let's reward them for the type of support they gave us. Okay, boom. There's a political science theory there, there's an engineering theory there. We also heard things from fields like sociology, environmental justice, environmental study, that were saying, well, your social demographics, social group demographics in a particular region, the extent to which these are marginalized folks might also shape whether a government is actually going to care about your people, right? They may not care as much about marginalized groups because maybe they think that you're not going to punish them when it comes to the elections. There's a sociology potential explanation. We consider all of this. So cross-disciplinary engagement can actually enable some innovation, and it can really improve the type of research that you're doing. All right, so some techniques that might help. And I don't want you to overuse these techniques. These are things that are supposed to help you, not do the work for you. But one thing that's really helpful when you're doing literature reviews is that you will find that there are already existing literature reviews out there. We talked about this, review essays. Use those. Ideally, you find something recent. If you don't, always keep in mind that if the review is 10 years old, well, there's been 10 years worth of publishing since that thing was published. And it takes about a year or two to get something published from the time you submit it. And from the time you finish writing it to submission is also not that quick of a process. So you may be dealing with a 15-year-old review of the literature. That's outdated. So yes, reviews can be great, especially if they're recent and if they're well done, but they're not the only source that you should be using to get a sense of what's written out there. Here's how I use reviews. I open up a review and I get a sense of what's been written about the topic, the main themes that are out there that are discussed, and then I start digging into those actual articles that were cited, and I start reading those as well, especially if they covered a topic that I'm really interested in. So one thing that we'll talk about is summarizing the main claims of a study. Reviews can do that, but they don't always do justice to a study. Think about it. They're summarizing potentially 100 studies. So, in 10,000 words, it's really hard to summarize 100 studies. So you're not gonna get everything that you need to know about the studies that are most relevant to your work from a review, but they're a good start. Also, they've already gone through a process of determining what is relevant to this particular topic. We'll talk about how do we determine relevance as well. You know, reviews also have done the work of organizing this review thematically. They're not just giving you a summary of what's out there. They're also telling you, look, collectively, we've reviewed the literature, we've identified, after reading 100 studies on this stuff, that there are gaps of knowledge, but actually there are these strengths. We know a lot about this thing, we don't know a lot about this other thing. Okay, you as a reader, you could say, maybe I focus on what is not known because we know a lot about this other stuff. And then they can organize studies thematically. That's a really important process, and it's something that you'll learn how to do as well. Some folks call it coding, not the computer science type stuff. In qualitative research, there's also the term coding, which is an act of interpretation of different observations and thematically organizing what you are observing. You can do that with literature. And of course, once you have these different bodies of research and different themes, you might be able to develop specific theories about that can explain a potential outcome of interest. You can also get a sense of whether there's consensus or disagreement. Some meta-analysis about climate change are exactly this. I mean, when you read the IPCC reports about climate change, they are reviews. IPCC reports are reviews. They're not primary research. They're not actually commissioned to go out into Antarctica and drill a big hole and come out with the nice ice and then take it to the lab. They don't actually do that. They read the studies that were done about that. And then they look at the extent to which there's a consensus, whether we're seeing that it is likely that X is causing Y. Does that make sense? The reviews. All right, so we need to use existing databases, right? Okay, and I want to say something, right? Google Scholar is helpful. It can be really helpful. It's a shortcut. You can actually use your PIT ID so that Google Scholar always tells you when your PIT ID would give you full text access to the studies that are showing up on your Google Scholar search results. That's a great tool. There's this thing called libkey, L-I-B key, libkey. If you Google PIT libkey, you download it's a browser extension. It'll always show you whether the full text download is available. You'll save so much time if you download libkey, because it'll automatically give you access to the full text. The whole process of finding full text access is cumbersome. It can take a lot of time, and it's just a waste of time. So having a tool like that will save you some time. But in terms of making sure that you're going to the place where all of the major journals about that topic are indexed, where they are stored, where you are able to identify all of the relevant literature that's been published about that topic in peer-reviewed journals, you want to make sure that you leverage existing databases. So one really important one is the Web of Science. The Web of Science is a very interdisciplinary and it's a generalist source, and it contains things like the Social Science Citation Index, the Humanities Citation Index. These are databases that aggregate all of the publications from all of the major journals in those general areas of study. The same is done through databases like PubMed. If you're in the life sciences, also they have important work on emergency services, biomedical science. These are examples of databases that I use with a research team that I led to conduct a literature review on the question of social vulnerability to disasters. And because it's such a broad question, we cast a really wide net and we included Web of Science, PubMed, Search Index, Public Affairs Information Services, EBSCO, so on and so forth. It's not even all of it. We had actually, I think, more databases. But again, this made sure that we cast a really wide net and that we weren't missing relevant literature on the topic. All of these databases are available through the PIT libraries, and we'll go through how you gain access to them. Okay, so you've gone to the PIT library databases, and what do you do next? Well, you need to have a series of keywords about the topic that you're investigating or that you're writing about, so that that will actually generate search results that give you the relevant literature about that topic. Developing those keywords is a really crucial part of the work, because whether you actually include the keywords that are relevant to your topic can determine whether you actually catch the literature that is appropriate for your review. So in our case, we had a bunch of keywords. This is only a fraction of them, but on this question of social vulnerability indices, these are specific measures of social vulnerability to disasters and health issues, like health emergencies and disasters, things like pandemics, but also extreme weather events. We use social vulnerability, and then we use these truncated terms. What that does is that it captures the different variations of writing this word. So it could be that the literature is using index or indices, but when you do a truncated term with an asterisk, right before all those different variations of the word come through, it'll generate a search that includes all of those different variations of that term. Does that make sense? Are folks familiar with playing around with this? Cool. So you do this with all the potential keywords, and it's always helpful to play around with these and to go to a subject librarian, we have many of them here at Pitt, and say, hey, does this seem like a good list of potential keywords to include in my search? And they might say, actually, you might want to consider adding this one. Cool. Keywords, super important to make sure you're capturing everything. All right, so here's where we want to get into actually, now we have our keywords, we know which databases we want to use. Here's the PIT library system. I use this so much. I'm a nerd. My job is to do research, but I want you all to get familiar, to become familiar with this. This is so powerful right here. You can gain access to full books, even for just leisurely reading, but also the most powerful databases on research out there. So how do you get there? This is the homepage. You'll see right here in the middle, A to C databases. They are alphabetically organized. Are y'all with me? So you click on databases. I know I want to use the Web of Science because I know it's really comprehensive for this topic that I want to research. So starts with a W, go to W. And here it is, Web of Science. By the way, let's say that you are doing research and you are using news articles as your data. That's called archival research because these are archived articles. You have all of the Washington Post publications in one place. Recent ones and then historical all the way to 2000, and from 2000 onwards, you have full text access through ProQuest. You can also use Nexus Academic, I think it's called. Let me confirm that. That is also a great source of news articles. Nexus used to be called something else. Nexus Uni. Nexus Uni, you don't only get news articles from from all over the globe, but also you can get access to legal cases. Really, really powerful tool, right? Maybe you're looking at, I don't know, repression of environmental activists in Malaysia from 1990 to 2020. Then this could help you identify news reports about that topic, any legal proceedings about the topic. And this is where you start playing around with your keywords. You can put all of your keywords into this search because it allows you to add all of those keywords. But let's start with the literature. A to C databases. Let's use Web of Science. This is what Web of Science looks like, the interface of it. And here is, you can choose the specific databases that you would work with. So it may be that there are some of these that are more relevant to what you're doing than others. You can start narrowing down. I know, for instance, that I only want to work with recent literature in the social science citation index. Want to narrow it down. Otherwise, you're literally going to get 70,000 results. That's hard to sort through. So you're playing around with balancing being exhaustive while also being practical, because you're not going to be able to access 70,000 articles and read them. It's more feasible to read 10, 20, 30, maybe more if you're in a group setting. And that's cool. You know, I work with collaborators when we do reviews, and for a study that we just finished, we read more than 200 papers. That was a lot. That took more than a semester. But now we have a really good sense of what's been written about social vulnerability, and we can make arguments about the literature. So here you start putting in your keywords. Let's say that we want to learn more about social vulnerability. And maybe we also want to know about how those are used in disaster context, and we want to make sure we capture the plural term, not just disaster, but also disasters. So we put an asterisk at the end. It's still a little too broad, and really, I'm actually really interested in the state of Florida. So boom, I add Florida. And it's still a little too broad, so maybe I say Miami. I don't know, I'm interested in urban settings. There you go. Here we have a pretty narrow result, only 29 studies, maybe a little too narrow. Okay, it's too narrow. Let's go back. Let's just remove Miami. That narrowed it too much. All right, now we have 118 results. It's still a lot. You're not going to read 118 studies. So what do? There are a number of things that you can do once you're in Web of Science that can help you sort through these. I want you all to be really careful with this tool because it could misrepresent the state of the literature, but it is still very helpful for me to know what are the most cited articles about that topic. What does that tell me? When an article is the most cited article about a topic, it means that everybody engages with that article. There's something said in that article that everybody's coming back to. This could be a reflection of power dynamics in the field. There's a really well-known scholar that published something about this topic, and everybody knows that you need to publish this scholar. So it could misrepresent the state of the knowledge. It's just that everybody's playing politics and making sure they cite whoever wrote about that. But it also gives you a sense of what are the dominant understandings of a particular topic, because everybody's citing this article, right? And it may be that if you try to publish something about that topic and you didn't cite the highest cited article about that topic, maybe someone's going to come and say, how did you not engage with the most cited topic? with the most cited article about this topic. At the very least, have it in your list of references. I have had, this is a funny story. One time I was part of a group and I had, a few years before, published an article about intersectional solidarity. And we were writing another article about that topic. I was a co-author on that paper, and we didn't cite my old paper about the topic. And the reviewers come back to us and say, "You didn't cite Tormos-Aponte 2017. And we were like, "Are you kidding me?" Like, they almost rejected this thing because we hadn't cited my own stuff. But that article from 2017 had been well cited, and reviewers will pay attention to whether you've engaged with the highly cited stuff. So this is why you want to know what's highly cited. People care about that. Go ahead. We politely said, without disclosing that I was in the co-author list because it's supposed to be anonymous. I always reply to reviewers very nicely. Thank you so much for thinking about how we can expand our research and make sure that we've captured everything that is out there. While we did not cite 2017 Tormos-Aponte, we did engage with Tormos-Aponte's work in X, Y, and Z article, which we had, but we agree with you, and we have now added the Tormos-Aponte 2017 article. So, you know, people are also often trying to be stewards of a field. And there's been fantastic work done about how there have been entire bodies of literature that have been suppressed in academic settings, entire identities whose writing have been suppressed in academic settings. So when people see that they're not cited, they can, in a way, be trying to say it's not good rigor and good research to ignore what has been done about that, and it's an act of erasure. So you should engage with that. That can also be a form of gatekeeping. It could be a way of standing up for marginalized groups and marginalized writers, but it could also be a form of gatekeeping. And it could be that someone is an awful human being and their ideas are absolutely terrible, and the only circumstances under which you would ever cite it would be to tear it to pieces. So you'd rather not spend 500, 1,000 words of a 10,000 word paper on tearing this paper to pieces that you hated, so you don't cite it. But someone might come back and say, "How did you not cite this?" So you have to balance that when you're submitting academic writing for publication. People literally have Google alerts when they get cited. And they also get Google alerts for when there is stuff that's published that is similar to what they've written. And people will go through the reference list and make sure that they were cited. It's messy. But again, those politics exist. And it's why you want to make sure that you know what is written about a topic, and when you decide to cite or not cite, you're fully aware of the implications of that decision. But you can only be fully aware if you've done the reading. Other questions? Okay, so Web of Science allows you to sort by the number of citations. So boom, okay. When it comes to social vulnerability disasters in Florida, this article right here, published in 1999, is dated. Identifying and mapping community vulnerability is the most cited. So why can it also be dangerous to only read the most cited stuff? It's because it could be a 1999 article, and since 1999, what, 25 years? You better believe that our beliefs and our ideas and our perspectives around mapping community vulnerability have evolved drastically. So yeah, maybe you want to cite the foundational stuff that everybody engages with. But if you limit yourself to the highly cited stuff, you're not going to get the recent stuff, because it's hard for recent stuff to get cited that amount of times. It takes years for an article to become highly cited, with some exceptions. Some articles get highly cited very quickly. maybe you're inserting yourself into an area of research where there's a raging debate, there are a bunch of people writing about it, and all of a sudden you said something that everybody got excited about, for good or for bad, and everybody's citing it. So some articles become highly cited quicker than others, but this is why you shouldn't just sort by highly cited. It's helpful in terms of knowing what is everybody talking about, but it can also be dangerous if you are not really paying attention to the more recent stuff and stuff that might not be revealed by virtue of looking at what is highly cited. But here's another tool that I love. Okay, this article has 624 citations. It sounds like it's important. Everybody's talking about it. Okay, well, let's look at what those citations are. I click on them and it literally gives you the however many articles were that article cited. And now you can do what some folks call citation mapping. And you can literally draw up the conversation. Who said what? Who replied? Who replied back? You can see, because they're citing each other, they're mentioning each other. It's like tagging someone on social media. You can trace that in academic literature as well. Does that make sense? Okay, so among the articles that cited that piece from 1999, this is the most, these are the newest. Okay, let's see what's more cited among that. It looks like it's 3,000 something citations. Social vulnerability to environmental hazards. I'm not surprised. Why? Because this Susan Cutter article about social vulnerability is one of the most cited articles about that topic. And in 2003, when Susan Cutter and her co-authors went to write that piece, what did they cite? The 1999 article that everybody was talking about. But Susan Cutter absolutely crushed the prior article's popularity. Prior article had 600 something citations, and Susan Cutter, boom, 3,100 citations. This became one of the most highly cited pieces on this topic. The other one being Barry Flanagan from the CDC. By the way, if you're interested in these topics, I recommend you read both of these. I got to meet Barry Flanagan, pretty nice guy. In fact, we might collaborate someday if the National Science Foundation actually gives us the money. So here you see who are the people who are having the most read conversations about the topic. You can start mapping what kind of debates are people having. What these articles do right here is they tell you, when we measure social vulnerability to disasters, we should include these different variables, and then this is how we do an index of those variables, and the resulting score of adding those different variables is their measure of social vulnerability. That's what the CDC does. The CDC Social Vulnerability Index was the main tool that states used to decide who they would give the COVID-19 vaccine to. This is how powerful these tools can be. It literally makes a difference in terms of who gets access to life-saving resources in the event of a major disaster. So, academic literature can actually be really impactful. It can have real-world implications. It can inform decision-making. And in the case of social vulnerability, it absolutely does. Okay, questions so far about working with the Web of Science database and starting to identify literature? Do y'all feel like you know what you need to do? Go ahead.
Specific, like, amount of time that you're spending on part of the process.
I don't have an easy answer to that, really. I know folks have, constraints. So for the purposes of the class, I encourage you to do your best in terms of identifying relevant literature. I believe that in the guideline, I said there was a specific number of articles that I wanted you to engage with, and I can't remember how many. So I would revisit those. But it's hard to say how long it'll take you. I'm the type of person who has different ways of reading. I can spend like a couple of days on reading something because I'm really into it and I'm trying to. And that specific article, it has everything that I was looking for, like I hit the jackpot. And that article is gonna take a long time to kind of digest, and it's citing a bunch of stuff, I'm taking notes, I'm like. It's inspiring all type of ideas, that's gonna take me longer than maybe something I skim and I get through really quickly. And I do both, and both are things that we may wanna do. You will do some skimming. Why? Because in the process of selecting relevant literature, you're not gonna read the whole article. You're gonna read enough to say, this is relevant or not, and then you read it super carefully. So there's no quick answer to that question. And it's really something that you have to consider, okay, what are my constraints and how much can I do to be able to finish this project? My recommendation is also feasibility. You know, it matters more to me that you give me something that's completed than something that is not a good reflection of the amount of time you spent doing. And I say that as someone who's done that. I've gone down the rabbit hole of reading and reading and reading. Reading can be a form of procrastination. So you want to read with intent, and I'm giving you here some tools to read with intent, to have specific questions to ask about an article, and to keep moving so that you're not going down that rabbit hole and never actually finishing the tasks that you propose to complete.
What exactly is the difference between a citation and a reference?
A citation is the instance in which a study cites, or a text cites another text. A reference is the description of the text, which includes the title, the year published, the author, last name, author, first name, year published, the title of the article, the journal title or book title, and then the volume and issue, and then the page numbers. So reference is just the name of the article and all the information about the article. A citation is the instance in which you are referring to another study or a text. Does that make sense? It's a good question. I had to think about that one. Questions? Dean, how you feeling? Good?
Yeah.
Good.
What if you're nervous about, the right articles, because you can spend most hours, right, like reading all these articles, and you're like, I don't think this is exactly what I'm looking for, I think, would you say it's a trial and error process?
It is, and the way I deal with it is that I've written entire things, I've published them, I thought I did a really good job of reading everything that was about it, and boom, I stumbled upon like something that I'm like, how did I miss this? This is so important. It happens. You know, one hedge against that is to have collaborators and peers who are doing work on that topic that you can essentially share what you found with them and say, hey, am I missing something here? And we did that when we created our keywords. We actually verified with a bunch of folks, experts on the topic, and we're like, are we missing any keywords? We also consulted with the librarian. The librarian did their own process of making sure that we had a really good number of search terms, that they were looking at the right databases. But there's no guarantee. I think that one thing that review articles do is that they actually, when you try to publish a review article, they will ask you, what was your method of identifying those articles? So you want to actually keep in mind which keywords you use, what databases did you put these in, how many results did that yield, what criteria did you use to determine whether those studies that you ended up reading were relevant or not, and so your method for determining the articles that you would include in your review. So as I think one important thing to do is to Be systematic in terms of how you identify the literature and then be transparent about how you did that. I think when you do that, people will essentially say, well, you know, this was the method, it was a sound method, and, you know, folks are not necessarily gonna be like, how dare you miss that? But I will say that there's an element of knowledge justice that, you know, I always consult colleagues in the particular area of research to make sure that I've done that area justice in terms of citing the prominent authors and folks who we should be recognizing their contributions. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Other questions? Lane, how you feeling? Sounds pretty intuitive? Okay, okay. Any questions popping up so far? You're doing a list of references, and under that, you're providing your annotations. And I give you a whole guide on how to do that. We'll go over a little bit. All right, so we found our relevant literature, and guess what? You have a list of like 200, 300 articles. You're not gonna read 200 or 300 articles. You're gonna have to read through their abstracts and maybe skim through them to determine whether they are relevant or not. So you want to develop your own criteria of whether they are relevant. And I think I have. Did I include? Oh, sorry, it was right there. In the study that I conducted about social vulnerability, these were my inclusion criteria. They had to be published in English, even though I'm a Spanish speaker and I can also read Portuguese, and I'm really interested in literature in those topics. I decided that for the purposes of this particular study, it was a little too much to cast that net so wide to be reading 3 different languages, so we narrowed it down to English. We also narrowed it down to everything published after 2000. But these language choices can be very consequential. If you're studying a place like, I don't know, Chile has a bunch of disasters. If you don't read Spanish and you're only reading what's written in English, you might be missing really important local knowledge. In some cases, if you're gonna become an expert on a particular context that doesn't speak English primarily, you will want to learn that language, right? And you will want to actually read literature in that language. The United States is a very powerful place in terms of the production of academic literature, but it is not the only place. And I can tell you from my own knowledge about engaging with scholars of the Global South, many of them do publish in English, but also publish in other languages. So again, you determine your inclusion criteria. In our case, we included only articles in English. After 2000, we included things that were peer-reviewed, but also we included some gray literature. These are reports that are not necessarily peer-reviewed, but it's still very much relevant. And here's a key aspect of our inclusion criteria. We believe that an article was relevant for inclusion in our review if they clearly use, conceptualize, or apply a social vulnerability index within a hazard or disaster context. Okay, so it may be that the way I determine relevance varies from how other people determine relevance. Because this is a collaborative group, we actually had at least 2 people reading each article, and they had to resolve any disagreements about whether the article had clearly used, conceptualized, or applied a social vulnerability index within a hazard or disaster context. That is known as intercoder reliability. When you have more than one people read the same thing and determine whether they come to the same conclusion. You want to be transparent about that. It may be that there are a lot of discrepancies. You want to report those in your writing as well. And analyze, why do we see this so different? So determine your inclusion criteria. All right, you're reading, finally. You've narrowed down your list of 300 articles. You're now down to maybe 25 or 20, something like that, right? We don't have that much time in this semester to complete this assignment, so I don't expect you to read like 300, even 100 or 50. To get a sense of what the literature is out there about your topic. And this is why reading a good review essay could be really helpful to get a sense of what's out there. But I don't want you all to let the review essay do the work for you. I want you to be original thinkers. And also, just FYI, I feel like I have to say this because I want to save you the embarrassment. ChatGPT makes up references. It makes up studies that don't actually exist, and they sound super real. Don't embarrass yourself and go to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to give you 10 sources and to summarize them. Don't do that. It won't work. ChatGPT makes up citations and references. You've been warned. Please, don't let me find stuff that doesn't exist. All right, so you finally reading. What do? Well, Yvette Alex Asensaw and Jeffrey Knopf provide this framework that includes reading research with these things in mind. We want to be able to assess prior research and existing gaps, identify what are the main theories about a particular outcome, analyze how concepts are operationalized. This is another word for how you measure concepts. Like, let's say you're researching trust in government. Trust is a really mushy word. How do you define trust?
I don't know.
It's a weird one. Do you have a sense?
Like the belief that the other party will stick to their word.
Okay. How do you measure that? That's operationalization. Is your measure of a concept. Anybody, how could we measure this definition?
Yeah. I don't know, maybe like a number of times they have portrayed you before, like
Okay, we have a concept and we have a measure. Does that make sense? And it may be that the literature has dealt with how do we measure trust, and it has. And by virtue of reading the literature, you can get a sense of different ways in which people have explored this concept of trust. So, trust in government, for instance, some folks have measured it as voter turnout. And the idea behind that as well, voter turnout is a good indicator that people trust government because they actually invest the time that it takes to get registered and go vote. So they must trust government when they vote. It's actually debated, but the literature says that. And you can engage critically with that. So frameworks can help us get a good sense of how concepts have been operationalized, which is another way of referring to how concepts are measured. Questions about that? Cool. Also, you can review what existing data there is out there, what data folks use. Okay, so let's say, how many times have people betrayed another person? That's hard data to find. And it may be that instead we get stuck with voter turnout. It sounds like not a great way to measure trust, but it may be the best way to systematically assess trust in government throughout all of the US, because we don't have a holistic survey, like the census doesn't go house by house and ask people, how many times have you been betrayed? So that's hard to measure. Even though it could be a really good one because it aligns with your definition, sometimes we have to leverage what is out there. And literature allows us to identify what kind of data is out there. And you can make a justification by, for instance, saying, well, the literature has measured trust in this way. I think this is inadequate for this reason. And instead, we propose that we measure trust in this other way. And guess what? We found this other data, and it's perfect for this study. Another thing we do here is we summarize. We actually want to know what the major findings of the study are. But caution, do not confuse an annotated bibliography with a summary of an article. This is the biggest and most common mistake that I see in assignments of this nature. Essentially, people read the thing and they give me a 5-sentence summary of what the article said. That does not accomplish these goals of telling us how did they measure something, or what other existing theoretical propositions are there? Did they engage with those? What are the potential gaps in the literature? To what extent did they contribute and advance existing knowledge? You won't know that by reading one article, but instead by virtue of reading a body of literature about the topic. And then you come back once you've read it all and said, actually, after reading literature, I realized that this article failed to engage with this particular dynamic. Does that make sense? Cool. So you'll see in the Alex Assensaw reading, as well as in these slides that I will upload in Canvas, all of our slides are on Canvas, that they give you a step-by-step series of instructions of what to ask about an article. There's a really nice table in the Alex Assensaw. There's 2 big tables in the Alex Assensaw reading. Use these. Literally take those questions, put them in your notes document, and start answering them, and then turn those answers into your annotations. Once you're able to read that entire body of work, then you can make arguments about that body of work by, for instance, saying that, look, these are essentially some of the main answers to this question. These are the main themes that we've identified about that particular topic. Generally, the research shows that this particular variable is associated with this other variable. You can make authoritative arguments like that because you've read the literature, and you can evaluate the overall quality of the literature. This thematic organizing of the literature is really important for you to write a literature review. And I approach it in the same way that I approach qualitative analysis. Essentially, what I share here are some techniques to thematically organize the literature. And in our Canvas page in the module, I included this step-by-step guide on how to do this. So I'm really trying to make this intuitive in terms of telling you, open the document, read the article, put the title, the author, the publication year, then the abstract, and so on and so forth. Tell me what the independent variable is. Tell me what the dependent variable is. And I even give you some guidance on how to identify these in the study. It may be that you read stuff that is not an empirical study, and in that case, this wouldn't apply. You would instead want to use other considerations for evaluating the article. All right, so qualitatively trying to thematically organize the themes that you identify in the literature. Some folks call that coding. A code is a word, phrase, or sentence that represents aspect of an observation or captures the essence of an observation. It's a theme. A code is a theme that you can find in any qualitative data, but you can also find in literature. So I encourage you all to approach this annotation of the literature and literature reviews as you would coding qualitative data. What do you do when you're coding qualitative data? You often write memos that are reminders to yourself about different aspects of what you're reading. Maybe your memo describes the broader body of literature. As you're 7, 10 articles into it, you're starting to realize that there are certain trends in that literature. Write that up, because that's already doing the work for you. You'll come back and you already have your memos written. It will identify interesting aspects of the literature, theoretically interesting aspects of the literature, gaps. You describe it, you describe themes, and you consider ways of exploring those themes. I have a whole lecture on how to do qualitative coding. If anybody's doing that type of work, let me know. I'm happy to share it with you. But essentially, you can see these themes as buckets. Let's say we have 5 buckets. These are 5 themes. You have 10 articles, and different aspects of those articles you plug in and you throw into these different themes, these different thematic buckets. That is the art of coding. Does that make sense? That is thematic organization of the literature. All right, so I want to introduce this method for qualitative analysis. It's something that is not usually taught at the undergraduate level, but this is an advanced class, and I think you're really smart people, and I think I can explain it to you in a way that you can understand it. Qualitative methods are different from quantitative methods. Typically, instead of looking at calculations and numbers, they're looking at other types of observations. They're looking at text, like interview transcripts, or social movement agendas, or mission statements, or meeting minutes. They could be looking at spaces. And like, for instance, right now, someone could come and say, I'm going to get a sense of what the mood was in the room. And start describing, well, what do I mean by the mood? And then start describing it. Well, it seemed like everybody was really quiet. They're really looking at their laptops. Are they really like, yeah, what's going on? Anyways, that is a description. Some people could call it an ethnography. And you place yourself in a setting and you're observing what is happening in that particular setting. Qualitative analysis can happen in many, many ways, and I'm going to talk to you all about one way that can be applicable to what you're doing with your reviews of the literature and your annotated bibliographies, and it's called grounded theory. Grounded theory is a simple concept. Here's what it means. There are existing theories that out there that have tried to explain our world. Let's say that about a particular phenomenon, you have three main theories. Those theories, you can read all of your literature with them in mind and treat them as buckets. And anytime that an article that you're reading touches on that particular theory, you place it on that bucket. You've now coded for that particular theory. Are folks following me? What makes it grounded theory is when you combine existing theories, those three existing buckets, with new theories that you identify as you're reading the literature. So let's say that there are three main explanations for the outcome that you're interested in, but as you're reading, you're like, oh, there might be these three other potential explanations, and you start sorting all of your references in the articles that are aligned with those new explanations that you developed into those theoretical buckets. When you combine existing theory buckets with new buckets that you identified in the literature, you are doing grounded theory. Does that make sense? Why do I like it? I like it because you can do two things. First, you can speak to existing theory and discuss about the extent to which existing theory is strong or weak, while also having the liberty and the creativity of identifying new potential explanations for a social problem. So you can innovate. And that's why I like grounded theory. Because I want you all to not just reproduce what's out there, but also feeling like you have original contributions. And it may be that as you're reading about a particular topic, you come up with new potential ideas for trying to understand that topic. Okay? Any questions about grounded theory? So you are combining themes that are already in the literature with new themes that you're identifying in the literature. Cool. No questions? All right. So the Alex Assensaw reading and the Jeffrey Knopf reading have specific questions. This is what I was talking about in terms of how do you avoid the tendency to just summarize an article? These are great questions that you can ask of an article right here. You're going to find them in the slides on Canvas, but you will also find them in the Yvette Alex Assensaw reading. These questions, like, for instance, you could ask, what questions have the existing publications addressed? and what issues must be addressed. Maybe the existing literature is missing something. You can make an argument that the literature needs to address this other question that it has neglected so far. You can, for instance, ask the question, what are the main conclusions of existing research? What do they argue? So that has a summary element to it, but it's really helpful to know, what do existing studies conclude? What points of convergence or disagreements are among those articles? The act of telling me what those disagreements or agreements might be is an interpretive act, and it's a contribution. This is why it's helpful to do this type of exercise of reviewing the literature. What theories are there? What policies are they engaging with? What type of evidence have they used? All this is helpful to take stock of this. In fact, when you read reviews, they will often give you even like tables where they tell you X amount of articles use this method, while this other amount of articles use this other method. These are the strengths and weaknesses of each of these. So these questions are here to help you, and you'll find them again in the slides and in the Alex Assensaw reading. Any questions? Okay, feasibility is crucial. You don't have the rest of your life to work on this assignment. As much as I would like to spend the rest of my life on only studying one topic and retreating into some cabin in the woods and nobody bothers me ever, ever, ever again, and I don't owe anybody anything, and somehow I have all the food that I need and I don't have to go anywhere, that is not my life, and it will probably never be the case. So feasibility is crucial. Okay, so you're not going to spend the rest of the semester on this assignment. How do you avoid like going down this major rabbit hole of trying to read everything that's out there? Here's a few suggestions. Maybe you don't have enough sources. Okay, well, maybe your question was a little too narrow. Expand it. Maybe remove one of the keywords that you were using in the Web of Science, right? Maybe you were focusing too much on a particular area. Maybe you really want to focus on the state of Pennsylvania or Allegheny County, but there hasn't been much written about it. So you zoom out. All of a sudden, you're looking at other research across other settings and thinking about the extent to which that research might be applicable to this setting. Even if there is nothing written about the specific thing you want to research, there is something out there that is relevant. So you can expand, broaden the question, and look to see what kind of insights that existing research might have for the kind of research you want to do. The problem might be the contrary, right? It might be you managing too many sources. So what do? You're a little more selective. You tweak your inclusion criteria. Maybe you're looking at too large of a time period. Maybe starting articles from 2000 about the pandemic was too much. Why? Because there were more than 40,000 articles like published within the first few months of the pandemic about the COVID-19 pandemic. And there have been many more other pandemics throughout history. So you need to narrow it down. What about the pandemic do you want to know? What region? What problem related to it? Maybe it's comorbidities. Maybe it's racial determinants of pandemic mortality. Boom. Okay, you're now narrowing it down. You may now have a feasible amount of articles to deal with the limited amount of time that you have to spend on this project. So consider these strategies as a way to make this a more feasible project for you. And I'm very much interested in hearing from you if you're telling me I am struggling with any of these, and I am happy to help. I am here to be a resource for you. So I want to share here a few principles in terms of things that you should keep in mind. Yes, you want to summarize some key conclusions, but you want to go deeper and you want to also assess the state of knowledge. What do we know? Where are there some uncertainties? And where do we don't have a lot of data? You know, the pandemic is a great example. We knew a lot about pandemics generally, particularly about sort of airborne transmission of viruses, but we didn't know a lot about the effectiveness of an mRNA vaccine. So that was a major missing aspect of the research at the time. And guess what? By virtue of identifying that as a major gap, we were able to invest heavily in that type of work, and we had an mRNA vaccine. Fascinating. Anyways, these principles are here to help you go beyond the summer. Any questions? All right, these last few things I want to mention are more philosophical in nature. You might be wondering, why did I make you do this type of exercise? Well, this is a different type of thinking and learning. This is something that can help you with your critical reading and analysis skills. That is a key learning outcome of this class. I don't merely want you writing for the sake of writing. I want you to write because it makes you a better critical thinker. This exercise helps us accomplish that.